Laid on the table of the House today are the following: Annual Report on Audited Financial Statements of the Consumer Affairs Commission for the year 2017-2018. Appropriation Account, Head 28026, Family Court for the year 2017-2018. Head 28028, Revenue Court for 2017-2018. 0400, Office of the Contractor General 2016-2017. Head 16049, Management Institute for National Development for the years 2016-2017 and 2017-2018.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees. Notice of motion given orally. Dr. Phillips, you could, Dr. Phillips, I will make reservation for you as soon as the matter is properly done. So you don't have to do it now.
With your permission and the others. In other words, one you have approved already, and there is another.
I only saw one. Dr. Phillips, could you hold? I'll allow you to do both.
All right, I'll wait.
And let me see the one, the short one, because I haven't got a chance to look at it. Notice of motion given orally. Questions and answers to questions.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that
before you.
Yes. Who?
You, Mr. Paula, go ahead.
Oh. Mr. Speaker, I know that the Minister of Energy is speaking today. She had offered to provide me with some additional answers this week, but in light of the presentation today, I suppose you'll do it next week. I just want to be clear.
Ms. Curtis.
There were some additional responses that you had promised, so I'm inquiring whether or not it will be done this week or next week.
Member, they were tabled. They were tabled. Yes, they were tabled. Yeah.
Well, I did not approve of them tabling. You know, the person who asked the question is a person that you would consult with before. So, can we take them next week? Because I think there are some important issues that we want to raise. What?
Mr. Speaker, at the expiry of 21 days, I propose to ask the following questions of the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Tweed, are those the questions you brought today that I told you you were not approved to put on Parliament? Are those the questions?
Mr. Speaker, these questions were...
Mr. Tweed, are those the questions that you presented today? I have advised you they have been sent to the Legislative Council to look at, and they have advised me that is not the proper way. We're going to correct it and do it next week.
Mr. Speaker.
You are one of the leading members of Parliament.
Thank you for the... Mr. Speaker.
Intelligent
thank you,
and right up.
Yes. Mr.
And
Speaker,
I'm saying,
I am within my rights to ask questions.
Mr. Tweed, I am following the standing orders. Those questions are not approved for today. They will at the right time. They have been sent for further explanation to me.
Mr. Speaker.
If it comes later, I will allow you to present.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much.
No, sir. You must hear me. You can't do that. Mr. Speaker, when questions are presented to the House within the time stipulated, if there is any concern, they ought to be raised in time for them to be tabled at the appropriate sitting. I am within any member's rights to ask such questions which are very simple and which were submitted in time. And I think that I must crave your support to ensure that as I have moved, presented correctly, and moved, that they be placed on the order paper. I insist. Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Trade, let me advise you. The questions were given to me less than 5 minutes before the House starts. I did not get a chance to look, and I have advised you before the House starts that I didn't get a chance to go through them and that there were some questions about some of your questions. I'm now saying to you, and I expect you to write up the House this week. So let me tell you so you can, let me tell you so you can write it properly. The questions will be reviewed according to the standing orders, and when I get the go-ahead, they'll be placed on the standing order. As of now, they are not accepted.
Mr. Speaker, in order that the chair may receive our entire respect, it is very important that you impute no personal motive to any member. Mr. Speaker, with the greatest of respect, if I am out of order...
I accept your criticism
Mr.
about
Speaker,
personal motive.
No, I am on my feet,
time,
I have a right
I'm going to be personal, because you've been writing about the Parliament all the time.
Mr. Speaker, would the member yield? Mr. Speaker, this need not cause any problem because we are governed by standing orders. Okay. Standing order number 14, nature of questions. And number 15, specifically, 15.1 says, a question shall not be asked without notice, unless it is of an urgent character or relates to the business of the day, and the member has obtained the leave of the Speaker to ask it. Now, on no basis can that question be asked today if the Speaker, number one, said that he did not get adequate notice. Number two, that it is not relating to the sitting of the House, the business of the House today. And number three, it is not of a national significance, great national urgency. So with the Speaker's denial, it has happened to me many times, member, many times. Happened to me where I have sent a question to the Speaker and the former Speaker of the House, Mr. Peart, repeatedly would say, I cannot accept this or I cannot accept that. And I yield and rephrase and come back. I am suggesting, member, that you do not insist on the course that you seem intent on and allow the matter to be looked at again and brought back on the next sitting of the House.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'm sorry, you want to...
Yes, I just want to respond to the point that the House Leader has raised, because that matter, yes, Mr. Speaker, the House Leader, in trying to diffuse the situation, has made it a little worse, because he referred or he implied that the member was seeking to ask questions without notice. But that's not true. The member is given the 21-day notice, and so that provision is when the member wishes to ask urgent questions and not questions that for which the member is tabling and giving the appropriate 21-day notice.
Notice to the Speaker. You can't come to the Speaker 15 minutes before the sitting and say you're going to then. Your relevance is redundant. Your relevance in terms of timing and notice is redundant, and I reject it. Mr. Speaker, I encourage you to proceed with the sitting of the House.
Mr. Tweed, you wish to debate this motion. Let me again say it. I received the questions a few minutes before the House started.
Mr. Speaker, I submitted it within the required time.
Have a seat, Mr. Tweed. I'm speaking. Have a seat, please.
You can shut me off any time.
Have a seat, please. I advise you. Order, please. Order. Order, please. I advise you, Mr. Tweed, that there were some questions about your questions and that I have sent them on for clarification. I'm now re-advising you that I have been so advised that there are some questions about your questions, and therefore they will not be allowed to lay today, but they certainly will be laid the next time. Thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, the leader of opposition business just draw your attention to standing order and when is required. But I wish to remind the leader of opposition business, when he sat here as government, the clerk advised us a convention drafted by him, crafted by him, that any question, this is my finger. Thank you. There was he drafted by him that all questions, you were sitting here, I was across there, that all questions, Dini Pate was sitting, Michael Pate was sitting there as speaker at the time, that all questions for the House must be submitted at least one day before so it can be reviewed and the speaker can see it. You were sitting here. Don't be Susan.
Order, please. Let me repeat for clarity. Again, personal. So that if it is written, it is written correctly. I am not objecting to your questions. I have not gotten a chance to read them through, and I have been so advised that there are some questions about your questions which I will look at and make sure they're laid next time around. Thank you very much. Motions relating to sitting of the House.
No, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at the expiration of 21 days, I'll ask the Prime Minister to answer these questions.
Not moving because the time is going to take too long.
You did not submit that to me.
I did, Mr.
You did? No, no problem.
What is happening here? What is going on?
Let's go on. Motions relating to the sitting of the House. You have a question? Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. Mr. Semuda. Dr. Clark.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to invite you to call on the Minister of Finance to take the matters that we had indicated to the House that we would take last week, but because of the time involved, I gave him an undertaking that he would be presenting them today as the first item of business. So proceed, Mr. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I just rise to open the debate on the bill, the Act to amend the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Act of 2019. Mr. Speaker, the bill before this Honourable House today, an Act to amend the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Act of 2019, seeks to amend the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Act to revive the lapse provision giving the Minister the power to make orders granting concession on the importation of fuel oil to recognized bauxite and alumina producers in the bauxite industry, and to provide the Minister with the power to have such orders be given in retrospective effect. Mr. Speaker, Section 7 of the Primary Act accords recognized bauxite producers concessions on fuel oil, except petrol, which they import for the mining of bauxite and the production of alumina. Section 7 sub 2 and Section 7 subsection 3 stipulate the prescribed period within which this benefit could be derived as November 1st, 1979 to December 31st, 1996, which is defined as a prescribed date or such other date as the Minister may by order prescribe. Mr. Speaker, because the sector has been identified as a key contributor to national development, in 1997 the government of Jamaica, i.e. after December 31st, 1996, determined that to ensure that the bauxite and alumina industry would thrive, the Act was amended to allow the Minister by order to extend the prescribed date subject to an affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives so that the industry would continue to benefit from the concession. Mr. Speaker, as a result, the date was 1979 to 1996. In 1997, the GOJ amended it to allow the Minister by order to change that prescribed date. And orders have been issued consecutively since 1997. The last such orders issued on July 1st, 2015, and extended the prescribed date to June 30th, 2018. When attempting to further extend the prescribed orders by date, the question of validity was sought from the Attorney General's chambers based on previous comments from the Office of Chief Parliamentary Counsel on preparation of an order, who confirmed that the prescribed act could continue to be extended by order under the Act. However, by the time that feedback from the Attorney General's chamber was given, the timeline to extend the order would have lapsed, which meant an amendment needed to be made to the Act to reinstitute the concession. Mr. Speaker, in contemplating whether the amendment would be made to the Act, consideration was given as to whether the bauxite sector was still in need of the support provided by a concession being given on the importation of fuel oil. After consultations, Mr. Speaker, we determined that the concession was still needed to this industry to allow it to remain operational. The concession somewhat offsets the efficiency losses associated with aging machinery and plants, and the industry players, because of the decades of the concession, from 1979 coming all the way through, would not have budgeted for that additional expense in their operations. Consultations and subsequent amendments to the Act also support the need for the Minister to be able to retroactively give effect to any orders done subject to an affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives. This would prevent the possibility of any future order expiring and would allow the Minister more latitude whereby he could suspend the benefit at any time that he believes the sector is not in need of the support, but then reimpose same at a later date if conditions were to change. Mr. Speaker, the following is a summary of the amendments being proposed. Amendments to Section 4, 5, and 8 of the Act. Clauses 2, 3, and 5 of the bill amend the references to schedule in the Act so that the word first will precede the word schedule, as the Act is likely to have an order prescribing the period as a second schedule. Amendment to Section 7 of the Act. Through Clause 4 of the bill, the current Section 7 is deleted and replaced with a new Section 7, which removes the limitations on the date for the order and provides the minister with powers to make, amend, or revoke orders to prescribe the relevant concession period. It also provides the minister with the power to give such orders retrospective effect when required. Mr. Speaker, the Memorandum of Objects and Reasons states that the decision to amend the Act is to grant the bauxite sector duty concession on fuel oil from the 1st day of July 2018 to the 30th day of June 2023, to authorize the minister to grant by order a new relevant concession period subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives where the period for doing so has expired, and to give retrospective effect to an order made under Section 7, subsection 2 of the Act. Mr. Speaker, I now seek the support of the members of this Honourable House in passing this bill, an act to amend the Bauxite and Alumina Industries Encouragement Act 2019 and the amendment tabled, subject to any further amendments that are made here today. Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. It's an amendment that I had suggested. Mr. Speaker. Thank you. It's not his bill. That's not his bill. It's not his. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. May it please you?
Dr. Golden.
Thank you, sir. Doctor as well. Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Speaker, this is, as has been indicated by the Minister, essentially extending the life of an arrangement which has been the norm for many decades now to support the bauxite and alumina industry. And as such, it's really uncontroversial in that regard. I would ask that the Minister, when he closes the debate, if he could indicate what would have happened in the interim between the expiration of the concession period, which we were told had expired last year, and this bill coming into effect. What has been the arrangement in relation to the importation of fuel oil for the bauxite and alumina companies during that period? This is going to have retroactive effect, so it would indicate that any duties that have been paid in the interim, if there were any, would be refundable. If they weren't paid, on what basis were they not paid, given that their concession handled? On the wording of the legislation, I had proposed to the Minister an adjustment to subsection 4, which she saw the merit of, and there's an amendment sheet with that proposed amendment, for which I'm grateful, which essentially ensures that in the future, any further extension would have to be subject to affirmative resolution. That's my understanding of it. Because under subsection 2, an affirmative resolution of the House, not of the, because it's a fiscal measure, it wouldn't need to be approved by the Senate. Minister, I notice it speaks about customs duty or other similar impost, and I was wondering what what is intended to be covered by that, the words or other similar impost, because there are various imposts that apply on the importation of items, And I was wondering what this is intended to cover other than customs duty. I mean, there's SCT payable and there's GCT sometimes, and what exactly is it supposed to cover? And if it's supposed to cover those things, given that they're big ticket items, I would have thought it made sense to specifically clarify what is covered by the concession rather than leave it to be by this compendious but somewhat nebulous concept of a similar impost to customs duty. Yeah, the other point I'd make, it speaks of any petroleum fuel except petrol, and then lists fuel oil or diesel oil. But I would have thought fuel oil and diesel oil are petroleum fuels. I'm not sure, for example, and I think this is a point that you had raised as to the status of LPG or LNG being imported for the sector, and will it benefit from this? Is it intended to benefit from this or not? I mean, it does. It's a hydrocarbon, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know. It's technically it might be a petroleum fuel. I'm not sure, but there's no definition of the phrase petroleum fuel, and in that provision there is a list and a mention of two other items which one would have thought were covered by petroleum fuel, namely fuel oil and diesel oil, but apparently it was considered necessary to name them specifically. So I'm wondering what the status is of other fossil fuels that may come in, especially now that we're moving more and more to LNG-based energy. So those are the three issues I'd like you to speak to when you close, Minister. Just by way of recap, what will have happened to fuel oil or other petroleum product imports other than petrol, which is deliberately excluded, since the expiration of the most recent concession period up to the date that this comes into effect? Were duties collected during that period which will have to be refunded, or a credit given in some way against other taxes? Or if they weren't collected, on what basis were they not collected? What is meant by the words or other similar impost after the words customs duty? Which other imposts are intended to be covered by this? And if there are any, would it not be better to specifically name them rather than leave it in this rather imprecise way? And the question of any petroleum fuel, does that extend to LNG? Those are the three issues I'd like to hear from you on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will start where my colleague ended, which is a concern that I have raised in relation to the introduction of a new fuel. In fact, it's base load fuel in the form of natural gas arriving here as LNG. I'm hoping that the Minister of Energy, who will speak later today, will apprise us as to where we are with the regulations in relation to LNG. But Minister, I'm not sure, for example, on what basis do you, or if you do collect taxes now on the use of natural gas, as so many other businesses, apart from the electricity generating company, now will be moving and are moving towards the use of natural gas. And we still don't know the regime, the regulatory framework for its importation and distribution in Jamaica. And I thought we had left draft regulations some years ago, and I'm urging that perhaps later when the Minister speaks she could apprise us. But in relation to the revenues, I'm sure you are collecting taxes, so I'd like to know the basis of that and how it will apply to the bauxite companies, at least one of which we know two. Jamalco is moving to introduce LNG. The plant is just about ready. And I know GISCO is supposed to be doing a 240 megawatt LNG plant. I'm not sure how this bill covers them. And of course, the point that has been raised, the general point is that we do support the encouragement of this industry. But, Minister, we see it almost as a quid pro quo. This industry is an extractive one. It does do severe damage to our physical structure. And it's important that at the end of the day, as the companies are able to establish and do so, the Jamaican people need to see the benefit, the employment. And again, perhaps today you can apprise us as to the status of the bauxite levy to see what are the, yes, you remember that? Yes, those levies were imposed for good reasons. And we need to know there are 14 members of parliament inside here whose constituencies surround mining locations. They need to know how much is now in that community development fund to be able to offset some of the damages, inevitable damages that will result from mining operations. So perhaps you could apprise us as to how much is in that fund. And then, Minister, when I was Minister of Mining, every year I would know how much reserves we have for the foreseeable future. Yes, but as Minister of Finance, you need to know that more because decisions ought to be based on that. So, without burdening you too much today, and probably the Minister of Mining, when he speaks in the second, can apprise the Parliament. Where are we now in reserves? We have done 60 odd years already. How many more years do we have in this industry? And as the Minister, as the Leader of the Opposition pointed out in the budget debate, and I reiterated, are we now focused on value added rather than just the raw bauxite being exported? Should we not now, Minister, be contemplating a cap? So whatever agreements you have in place now for to be exported, you cap it and don't allow another ounce or gram to be exported, but focus on doing the value added to be able to produce and to the raw earth. And finally, I have to come back to the cockpit country because a year or so ago the Prime Minister made a major announcement inside here that all mining would cease in the cockpit country. That hasn't happened. No order has been signed. I have not yet seen the precise demarcation of the cockpit country. Yes, but it has to be followed by an order with the same delineation that this Parliament approves. And it's now over a year. It's now over a year. What was the intention? I think we need to have that matter. Industry are clear and certain about the future. So, Minister, yes, those are my concerns.
Minister, Mr. Speaker, I gave a heads up to the Minister last week about some concerns I have with respect to this bill. And though I'm one of the 14 MPs that the member from East Kingston referred to, today I really want to speak more from the perspective of the spokesman on industry, commerce, and competitiveness. Yes. Because I think there is an important issue here to do with fair competition. And I say that because although the bill speaks specifically to recognize bauxite producers, recognize alumina producers, that it is contractors that are used to do the loading, etc. And the benefit is passed through. The company imports it, and then they allocate fuel
to the various contractors that do different types of activity. But it goes just beyond the mining, the loading, and the haulage contractors. It's even passed through to suppliers of limestone, who supply limestone that is used in the alumina processing, alumina refining process. I believe they use it to make lime, and it's used as a flocculant in the process. And therefore, we're now talking about many, many companies and operators who get this fuel benefit passed through. So my question, and I had anticipated you would have addressed it in your opening, Minister, since I'd given you a heads up last week. My questions are, what measures would the ministry or its agencies have in place to ensure there is no leakage from this duty-free fuel, which is passed through to contractors at about $70 per litre, I understand, while the dealer price at the station, at the fuel station, is twice that or more than twice that. So it is a huge incentive for leakage. There's a lot of margin for profit in there. So I'm asking what specific measures, given the multiplicity of players who now can access this fuel, what measures are in place to monitor who gets it and ensure that there's no leakage into the general economy? Sorry? All the contractors are getting at this price. So you see, to the extent, for example, I am a haulage contractor, say for example, fuel would be a major expense for me. If I have 10 trucks that work in the bauxite industry and 30 trucks that work in the general economy, what assurance, what controls are in place to ensure that all the trucks don't cycle through and get the subsidized fuel? So that's the first question. The second question is specific to the suppliers of stone.